So here I am in 3D Coat, and what I want to do today is just show the power of the pinch tool in sculpt mode, in surface mode, sorry. Um, so I've just got my Vox tree here, okay. So if you're new to 3D Coat, it uses voxel sculpting to create forms. So it's a very free and easy to jump in and learn sculpting process. If you have some experience with like Photoshop, a lot of the workflow should be somewhat familiar. Um, but you see, it's pretty neat how you can just, again, freely sculpt like this. But for today, what I want to do is kind of look at the power of the pinch tool. Okay, well, we switch to from voxel mode to surface sculpt mode. Okay, so by clicking on that V, we can toggle into surface mode. So here I am, and I'm just going to use probably primarily two brushes here. I'm going to use the move brush, okay, and I will use the pinch brush, try to get my forms down. And smoothing, of course. Okay, so here I am. I'm going to go with my pinch tool, like so. Now the pinch tool, the way it works is we can change the strength, and this will basically control how much of a pinch we get. We also have a depth here, which we can control with this the depth parameter on our brush. Okay, and you also see we have this option here, which we can toggle on or off, called remove stretching. With that off, if I look at the wireframe on my mesh, you'll see it basically just will pinch the geo, like so. But if I have it on, it will pinch. Okay, when I'm finished my operation, it will check and it will do any remeshing that's required to reduce the amount of stretched polygons. You'll see even to the point where I can get greater and greater detail. Okay. Alright, so what I'm going to do, right now this is a relatively low poly mesh. I'm going to resample this higher. So I'm just going to go down to the bottom here and go resample. If you watch my other video, you'll know I set a hotkey for this. I set Control-Shift-R as my hotkey because I use it so frequently. I'll go to about 500,000 polys or so. And I'll also use Smooth All, which is another hotkey I use, Control-Shift-S, and do a few smooth iterations, Control-Shift-S. Let's punch in a higher number. Let's go 50, degree of 50. Okay, so I'll get a nice, fairly smooth mesh. Now we'll go back to our pinch tool, and I'll change the alpha on this to more of a sharper alpha. And what I'll do is I'll just block out the face of my character. So first thing I'll want is a brow. So I'm going to hold down Control and basically just draw a brow structure here. Actually, sorry, I'm going to adjust a few things on my pinch brush. So first of all, I'm going to change the strength down, put the strength down to a low number. I don't want it to pinch too much. I just want to drive in and out the surface. So I'm going to increase the depth of my brush. And holding Control, I will just create a simple brow structure like so. I'll also make some kind of a cheekbone structure and maybe a nose as well. I'll go over it over and over and over again like this. You'll see. And then this is again with holding Control. So it's kind of, it gives you a neat effect where if you go over it several times, you can almost fill in that form. And then without holding Control, I can basically go back in and kind of cut out and carve the shape that I want. Okay, control, holding control, and letting go of control to kind of get different forms. Okay, smooth as well. Smooth out certain shapes and forms. Alright, so we'll get, I'll just make this a little shallower and a little bigger and get a kind of a bigger kind of furrow going through the brow. Again, bigger, shallower. Get something going here. You'll notice there's like a little few dots. I can actually see the individual brush strokes. I actually don't want that, so I'm going to create a new brush here. So just go to, or just change my brush options. So I'll go here, and I will go to spacing. I'll set this to a smaller number, say like 5%. Okay, and now you'll notice when I make these operations, it's a lot smoother. I can go even lower if I want. It just starts to affect performance potentially. So I'm going to smooth this out. Okay, get my move brush, fairly big. So the one thing that 3D Coat is missing still, sadly, is move topological. So basically, a move that just works based on connected geo instead of being projected. And there's two kinds of smooth operations, or there's several different smooth operations in when you're in surface sculpting mode. One you can activate, and you can basically assign two to access quickly while you're using another brush. The default obviously is just smooth, and you can hold shift to access that. And then we can set another one here. I usually set that to anti-bump smoothing, and the second one is activated using control and shift together. You'll see I'm using the control shift anti-bump smoothing right now, and you see how kind of clean that leaves my mesh. Really nice smooth surface. That's one of the things that you'll find in 3D Code, like you might at times struggle with, is just getting a nice kind of really nice clean forms, and kind of having less bumps and lumps and things like that. I find that the anti-bump smoothing does a good job of really making that a nice, very, very clean looking form. It works best on flat surfaces. If you use anti-bump smoothing on kind of a ridge or a valley or something like that, it'll sometimes produce somewhat strange results, just based on the way the smooth algorithm works. Okay, so I have this. What I like about the pinch tool and sculpting with the pinch tool is I can get to my approximate forms fairly quickly. So again, I'll just go here. So I'm going to turn off my pinching altogether, the strength of my pinching altogether. So you see I can just basically drive out the surface without dragging new geometry in or out. So just using the brush this way is like, you can see how powerful that is. Just to really kind of get your creases in where they need to be. And if you go with a really big brush and hold down control, for example, you can drive things out like so. So what I like about it is just the speed at which I can get to an approximate version of my sculpt, of my form. So block things out. Some things that normally take maybe a little bit more finagling, and I can kind of get there quicker, easier. So here I'm just using the regular smooth brush. So if I do have to kind of go into an area where there are some peaks and valleys and smooth things out, that's when you want to probably use your general smooth brush. Um, but if you're on a flatter surface and you really want to make it like buttery smooth, that's when you're going to want to use your anti-bump smoothing. So I'm using anti-bump smoothing now. You'll see I'm keeping the brush relatively small just so I avoid brushing on top of the ridge. Okay, once I'm happy with that, I can go back to my pinch tool. I can turn the strength of my pinching up. I can make the depth of my brush way lower. And then I can just really clarify my forms even further. And you can again experiment with the depth of the pinch. And the nice thing about this, with remove stretching checked on, it doesn't kind of cause major issues in my mesh in terms of stretching. And again, by virtue of the primary sculpt workflow currently in 3D Code, there's no subdivision surface sculpting. So everything is basically happening on a triangulated mesh. So you will often have a mesh, at least in surface mode, that sometimes has different density throughout. It won't be necessarily totally uniform everywhere, which is good and bad in some cases because you can get localized detail, so you can keep your mesh in theory lighter and just have detail where you need it. But it causes problems because sometimes you get a not as clean of a surface if you don't know how to manage things properly. So you see, what I like again is I have a relatively light mesh here, but I can have like kind of like all the kind of sharp creases that I want, and the details that I need, and I can get them fairly quickly and easily. Okay, another thing I like to do with the move tool in this case, and I'll show you in a second, is I just sharpen up some of these forms. And you'll get a feel for uh, when to use strength alone, okay, with a flat depth, okay, when you just, for example, want to crease things out, and when to increase the depth because you want to drive into or out of the surface. Okay. So just using the smooth brush here, you can tell it's using smooth because it's turning green instead of red. so I can get really kind of nice subtle creases. The only problem that I've had with this is when I get into like a tight kind of spot like this, when I want to do like maybe a corner or something, then I start to run into some problems. They get a little bit harder to fix. I could probably use masking to get around that. I don't typically use masking personally in my workflow, but I think I might start, and let's just do it now. So let me go for freeze. It's called freeze here in 3D Code. I'll choose a hard edge alpha for my brush. Make sure the alpha is uh, the depth of it is beyond the diameter of the circle here, of the brush radius. I have some trouble with my new Wacom tablet here, sometimes getting it to pan properly. I'm just going to mask out the area that I don't want to be drawn into the brush. We could always increase the amount of topology here as well to get a sharper form. Because you see, I don't have a whole lot of control over the topology, um, so I have to be a little bit careful with how this is going to go. So go here. Get a bit of a ridge going here. Okay, and I'll want to clean that up. So I'll just go with my smooth brush. Clean up some of these forms. So you see, even with masking on, it's not a totally clean result. So this is something that I have yet to figure out a really kind of effective workflow for. But I can get close and just clean it up carefully. But ultimately, wherever possible, I like to find a workflow that I can do things in one step instead of multiple steps. It's not always the case, but yeah. Anyway, so I'll use the move tool now. So I'm back in my move brush, and I'm just going to hold down Control with this sharp fall off. Let's drive into my mesh here, okay, to get that that pinch that I want. Make this brush a little bit bigger, maybe a little. So just pinch in like so. Might do the same thing for nostrils here. So I'll just probably pull these up a little bit. And I'll often use the same brush for like the corners of my mouth, my character's mouth, just to kind of tuck things back a little bit. And also eyes, it will be useful to do that there as well. Let's see. make my brush a little weaker. Alright, so back with our move tool here, just further tweak and refine my shapes, my forms. Okay, just alternating here between regular smooth and anti-bump smoothing. Okay, and then I'll add some ears in as well. Smooth this out slightly. So I'm not a huge fan of what this is looking like. I hit F here just to focus my brush on that area. So oftentimes I'll have to go in with like a actual sculpting brush. In this case, Rapid 2. I usually turn on remove stretching while I use this. And just lightly kind of feel out the form just to build it up like so. And then of course smooth afterwards. Okay, but I ultimately will still probably have some trouble in these tighter areas, and this is where I take a slightly different approach. If I want to be ultra precise, in which case I would basically break this up into separate forms. I'd have the nose on its own layer. I'd have like the nasolabial fold here on its own layer, box tree layer. I'd have the muzzle of my character, or the lips, the upper lip and the bottom lip on their own layers, and then I'd ultimately merge them all together when I'm happy with the overall look. Another thing I might also do, depending on if I can get the form clean or not, is I might jump over into voxel mode and then back into surface mode, because once I go into voxel mode, it's going to make my mesh more uniform before coming back into surface mode. I will lose some details, but I have to kind of just know that going in, and not do it at too late of a stage of my sculpt, because at that point um, I will have lost a lot of important details. So I would generally do that once I've blocked out the forms, probably at around this stage. So let's actually do that now. So I'm going to go to voxel mode. We'll set the poly count to like 200,000. And you'll see it's going to erode some of the sharp, clean details that we've established, but that's okay. I'm just going to run smooth all, Control-Shift-S here, which is the hotkey I've set a couple times. And this is like the equivalent of what I might do in a 2D painting application. Actually, before I go to surface mode, sorry, while I'm still in voxel mode, I'm going to subdivide this a few times. I just wanted you to see the poly count that I have here. So I have about 500,000 triangles right now. I'm going to subdivide this, assuming that I'm going to kind of finalize this thing. Actually, maybe before I do this, I'd probably want to do the ears. So let's just quickly do ears. Use my sphere tool while in voxel mode. I'll basically just build out an ear kind of structure or form here. Generally speaking, I would actually do this on a separate layer as well, but I'll just do it on the same one for now. Use my cutoff tool. So you see smoothing in voxel mode works a little bit differently. It kind of just melts the mesh. So you have to, in this program, you kind of have to familiarize yourself all the different kind of properties of the brushes and the modes, the different modes and everything like that. And okay, so ultimately I'm going to have to go back into surface mode to clean this up. Let's go back to surface mode one more time. I'm going to just use my rapid 2 brush here to eat away. Whoops. Rapid 2, sorry. And just going to find my ear structure here. Let's carve out some of this shape. So basically, I'm kind of proving here why I actually usually make the ears separate and then merge it in after. But yeah, and I don't have as much experience with ZBrush, but um, for me, I find that this is kind of the one area where I have to find some workarounds when using 3D Coat is um, when I need to kind of get the sculpting like detailed areas as they kind of come together, like in close quarters like this. So this ear being right up against the face and trying to sculpt the ear separately uh, often causes me some problems or areas like that, or like the corner of the nose that I was working on before. So I found some workarounds, but I feel like it ought to not be so challenging to work through that. And I'd love to hear from people who use ZBrush if it's basically just the same kind of thing. You just have to manage certain situations properly. I imagine in ZBrush you'd try to optimize your topology and then use masking to get the shape or forms that you want, or using polygroups or different things like that. In which case, I mean, ultimately, I guess you are still in a way separating out different areas so you can work on them in isolation, but I guess it's just a slightly different approach, different way of going about it. Sometimes what I'll do, I'll use my pinch brush because it is so, or sorry, not my pinch brush, but my move brush here. Well, it's fairly precise, and I'll just basically drag out a series of points or drag in a series of points where I want them to go. Oops. Like so. And it doesn't look ideal, I know, but it will kind of come together a little bit later. But I find that this for me is a very kind of like very precise way of getting the shape or form that I'm looking for. Okay, so basically tucking in the areas that I want to tuck in. I can turn remove stretching on my move brush as well, in which case it will remesh the changes that I make. All right, so not nice looking yet, but it will in a moment. Then I'll go in with like a rapid 2 or something like that and just kind of draw on top. Or even my pinch tool actually would do a good job here. Um, so here I'm just gonna drive into the form a little bit, like so. And I'm not too worried about it being not ultra clean yet. I will get it there. Having enough topology also helps. So having a denser mesh would help kind of get some of these details. Again, it just become a little bit more unwieldy like to work with. So I'm just going to pinch this without driving in or out the surface. This part I'll pinch in a little bit, drive in while I pinch. Okay, I'll go with my rapid 2 and hold down control. Make the brush kind of soft or have a low alpha or depth. I'm just going in and clean this up a little. Alright, and then use my move brush with a smoother fall off. Okay, and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go back to voxel mode again, about 200,000. Okay, I deliberately actually want to lose some of that detail. I press Control Shift S a couple of times just to smooth things out. Here we go with my move tool. Because ears, we don't want a ton of harsh details everywhere. Generally speaking, we want it to be kind of soft looking. So I said that the move tool is projected. What I should have said is that it is volumetric. So I would rather a move tool that just deals primarily with the surface. Okay, so just basically like a kind of a fall off style, topological fall off style brush or move brush. Just going to smooth all a couple more times. Okay, so now I'm going to actually subdivide this. So I'm at about 200,000 triangles. Subdivide it once using this button over here. I'll do it twice. We'll go fairly high. Let me go to like maybe, I don't know. Why not? So we're going to go north of 10 million triangles here. And just give it a moment. So in the last, I would say even like 3-4 years, I don't almost ever go this high. Because I generally try to make more like stylized, simplified characters, but I'm trying something out a little bit different just for this video actually. So let's see how this goes. So I'm gonna go with my pinch tool, and we're gonna keep a lot of those nice kind of rounded forms that we have as a result of smoothing in voxel mode. But then we're also going to try to bring in some nice sharp kind of crisp details where we want them specifically, like like in the mouth here, for example. May have gone too high too soon. Turn my strength down. So I'm not pinching, I'm just driving in. Make this bigger so we can get a little bit more depth. So move here. Press F to change focus. Smooth. Yeah, and I think I went too high too soon, so I'm actually gonna go back to voxel mode. I'll go to say 500,000. So again, we're gonna lose some of the details that we just added. That's okay. And then smooth off a couple times. Probably going with my grow tool here in voxel sculpt mode, and I'll just try to pull out what I can while here. So this is only 500,000, but I'm able to get a little bit more nuance in my overall shape. Because I'm in voxel mode, I can do some interesting things like really cut out the nostrils, for example. Let's try a different brush, a build brush here. My build brush will respect the alpha of my brush more so than the row brush will. Okay, we're going with our move tool again. Move tool, and make sure we have a sharper alpha. Just gonna move some things around, so just tweak the mouth, similar to how I did previously. Okay, so again, last time I made the mistake of just jumping a little too high too soon, but I'm much happier now with the way this is going. So I build things up more gradually. I was trying something a little bit different to jump straight to 12 million polygons there, but it wasn't effective. So. One thing I'll probably also want to do is use a matte cap for sculpting versus a PBR shader. So the sculpting matte cap here, which I'm going to adjust. I'm just going to turn off the cavity settings here. And then I get a much better understanding of my forms. Okay. So let's see if we can't suggest a bit of an eyeball shape here. And what I'll generally do for eyes is I will do that on a second layer. Actually, what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and do it right into this layer. So I'll go to primitives, and I'll just make sure click to place is on, and scale size to brush radius, and I'll just position these accordingly. Okay, and I'll just press enter to stamp it into my scene. I'll just make this slightly larger, and on a new layer I will stamp that into the scene again. Make sure I have the same shader, and I'll just press subdivide a couple times. I've set that to a brush, and then I can go in here and just hold down Control to cut away the eye shape. That's one way to do it. Alright, so I want to be careful here. I don't want to necessarily merge this in because I'll lose some of the sharper forms because I'd be merging onto a layer that has lower resolution. So what I can do here now is that nose and profile is not quite sitting right with me. Let me just fix that. So I think this has to all come back a little bit. Okay. Let's get a bit more of a delineation of the lip there. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with this. I will subdivide this one time. So I'm at 2 million polygons, and now I'll jump over to surface mode. Usually I'll jump into surface mode at around 100,000 triangles, but we could probably get away with a little bit more this time. And now I'm going to merge this into that layer. So this eyelid layer, this guy, I'm just going to hold down Shift, drag from this edge of this layer here, and just hold down Shift and drop it onto the other layer, and it will perform a Boolean union operation. So you can see now that this is all one mesh, and I can smooth out that transition. So with my pinch, I'm just going to get this eyelid going a little bit better. And reference, I mean, ideally would be used here. Just smoothing things out. Fill this in with my Rapid 2 brush. So here I'm just detailing like some of the eye. And this is, again, I should be using reference. I'm not. So it's kind of somewhat based on what I think it should look like. Well, not somewhat, totally based on what I think it should look like. Um, and I'm not going for like realism or anything like that. I'm going for like, a reasonable likeness of a human face. F again to focus on forms that are close. Or sorry, basically to change your pivot points to be something closer by. I'll go with my pinch tool, make it relatively big here. I don't know if I need much depth. I probably need more strength, less depth, just to get a clean kind of pinched form. Probably want to drive that in a little bit though. So let's go for increase that a little bit. Go for something like that. And this is where, again, I'm going to get a little frustrated probably because what I want to do is not affect this form. So maybe I'll just get the one form first. I'll try something out here. See, I'm just getting making a really small brush here, and maybe that's the solution. If you found a solution in 3D Coat to working with those like tight quarters, let me know. And it might just be you have to go in with your sculpting tools and just be a little careful. Mask off the areas you don't want to sculpt on accidentally. Avoid things like pinch. And I guess what I could also do is probably use my inflate tool to get going in there as well. And I'll definitely go with my pinch here and just sharpen that up. And you know what? I'll go in with my inflate clay and just lightly go over this area a few times. Yes, let's do the mouth. Probably just use my flake clay for the mouth too. So this is not intentional, but it's reminding me a little bit of a player on the Toronto Raptors, previous Memphis Grizzly, Marc Gasol. I'm a big Raptors fan, so maybe subconsciously I'm sculpting him. Slightly older version though. Alright, so I'm going to go in here to the corners of this. I'm going to use my move tool. Again, I'll use a sharp fall off and pull that back a little bit just to get those corners. And I will also use the pinch tool here. Just to convey the lip structure a little bit. Okay. And we just want to probably detail out our ears some. And I want to bring back some of the brow stuff that I was doing before. So I'll do that with a big brush again. Just try to get some of this going on. This is with the pinch tool. So this way I find a lot faster than my other method, where I basically would create each individual form. And I've more recently started working like this, and I might continue to do so because I'm generally able to get just about all of the results that I'm looking for. Sorry for all this extreme zooming in and out. So here I'm going to reduce my strength of my pinch and just drive into the form to get that jaw structure. So that bottom lip kind of got a little bit weird. Probably went a little bit too deep in the cavity there. Again, reference. I say this, but reference would help. But sometimes I'm curious to see what I can do without reference. So this is more like just a drill. But if of course, if I were having to make the actual person or a person, I would definitely look at reference. And I find I don't always want to, but it seems inevitable. Like I have to do, some actual kind of actual, just like little brushwork and sculpting here to get things reading like just so. So as you can see, like even though I'm at about 2.1 million triangles, still not quite enough to get like rid of all uh, the artifacts on the mesh. Um, so that's again one of the kind of main reasons I'd like to get subdivision surface modeling in this application, just so that we can get sculpts that are like more so mathematically perfect instead of having to brute force our way to like tons and tons of geo just to convey whatever it is that we're trying to convey. So this is where I could definitely benefit from reference, like the inside of the nostril. I have no idea what that's supposed to look like. And some of these kind of close-up details of like the nose and things like that. But again, I'm not doing like a serious sculpt here. This is just kind of an exercise more than anything. So I'm using anti-bump smoothing here. Just clean up my form. Some of the stuff I can't fully clean up, again, just because I'm running into an issue of like um, not enough polygon resolution, in which case I'd have to subdivide my sculpt. And again, the problem I have with that, is just that it becomes an exercise in managing the dense parts and the non-dense parts. If I subdivide this, I'll also be subdividing the very dense parts, okay, just to get more detail on the non-dense parts. The alternative would be to go in and basically paint over top of my mesh on the parts where I want detail. The problem with that becomes I'd have to do that on the entire mesh, right? So if I wanted to get like rid of these little faceted edges or faces, um, I'd have to kind of do something pretty drastic. What I can also do, I can just right click on this, change my shader settings, edit current, oops, right click, edit permanent shader settings, and just uncheck flat shading, and it'll smooth things out that way too. So that is the alternative, and that also works, of course. So I didn't do the ears here. Let's do the ears quickly. Use the draw tool to start. And I'm using the draw tool here just because I want a softer shape to my brush, and the draw tool respects my brush alpha, whereas the Rapid 2 does not. The Rapid 2 is better for just blocking in, massing out like different forms, whereas draw will be better for any kind of like more precise kind of detailing work. So if I wanted to use like this guy, for example, it's useful for that kind of stuff. Again, unlike ZBrush, you press Control to get the alternate brush function, not I believe Control in ZBrush is for masking. I could be wrong about that, by the way. When I use ZBrush, I don't use it very frequently, so basically the first 10 minutes is remembering the hotkeys. Doesn't take long. I actually purchased ZBrush a little while ago, thinking that I could quote unquote graduate from 3D Coat and make better sculpts in ZBrush. And I'm not saying that's not the case, but I found that I just didn't like working in ZBrush. And yeah, I've probably just gotten so used to working with 3D Coat that I just prefer it. And I guess the other thing was I felt like eventually I might have to use ZBrush to make good sculpts, but I think the better I get at 3D Coat, I don't think that's the case. And I feel like I've gotten a lot better at 3D Coat versus where I used to be, but I still have barely only scratched the surface of what's possible. I could do a lot more, I think, and achieve a lot better results. So I can't justifiably see a reason to make a permanent switch. I do still want to, work with ZBrush and work it into my kind of workflow, but it has like some definite pluses over 3D Coat. But unfortunately, I guess for me, if I wanted to switch, like 3D Coat also has major kind of pluses over ZBrush, right? So you gotta take the good with the bad, I guess, right? Regardless of what you choose. And I've familiarized myself now with this software, and I've so much about it that I really like, and the things that I don't like or the things that I'm missing, I've found ways to work around them to the point where they're not actually that big of an issue. But who knows, that might change. But I also think that the program will continue to improve. So we'll see. But again, I have both. So if I need to make a permanent switch, I can. And I'm also keeping an eye on Blender's sculpting, which is kind of cool, but I've never done a deep dive with it. Mudbox I've never really gotten into. All right, I think that will finish off about there. Maybe I'll do the backs of his ears. So go with the rapid 2 and just kind of block out my forms. Also like using scratches 2 and mud 2. For whatever reason, I find these easier to smooth out afterwards. Alright, so there we go. We have a character. I kind of want to fix up the neck here too. Kind of looks like Marcus Sol, I think. Kind of messed up the lips probably a little bit. So I probably maybe over define that bottom lip. It doesn't quite look like him as much anymore. I think the next things I would want to probably start getting better with is like working with masking more, or taking more drastic steps to break my mesh apart, even at a stage like this, to sculpt something maybe separately, um, and then put it back together after, smooth out the seams, which I have done in the past, but it's more of a last resort thing versus like part of my workflow thing. I think what I found in general, I could be totally wrong about this, but the greater lengths you're willing to go to achieve your results, you know, in a painting or sculpting or whatever, generally speaking, the more, I guess, the better you get. Like, not the better you get, but the better results you're able to consistently produce. Just because you're willing to go to that place that most people aren't willing to go to, I guess, right? So the more you can make the inconvenient, quote unquote, inconvenient things feel kind of just normal, part of your pipeline, part of your process, I think you start to grow and kind of get closer to your goals. And distinguish yourself, I guess, from the people who aren't willing to go to those lengths, right? And I guess at that point, it comes down to who really wants it. Um, and that's something that I always struggle with. Like, could I be working harder? I always could be, right? But yeah, so there was a time when I felt like I wouldn't be able to do this in 3D Coat. I thought like to get kind of really clean forms and all that, I would have to work in ZBrush. And the cool thing is I only have like 2 million polygons here, 2.2 million triangles. So it's not even quads, it's triangles. So basically 1.1 million quads if you think about it, right? If I switch my shader here, get a nice skin shader. Start to get a sense of what this might look like. And this is maybe a little bright. Let's get a rim light going. Okay, so there's our weird stylized head, maybe Mark Gasol ish person. Yeah, just kind of a fun exercise. And again, hopefully, kind of opens your eyes to some of the workflows that are possible in 3D Coat and how I kind of approach things and try to ideally achieve things a little bit more efficiently. Yeah, and I didn't even get into like sculpt layers and all that kind of stuff, which this also has in sculpture, texture painting, um, retop, all that. So maybe future videos I'll kind of cover a little bit more of that pipeline in making assets for real-time animation and rendering systems. But yeah, thanks for watching.